Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the massive starship Dominion and stared at the impossible sight on his screens. 300 years ago, humanity had lost one of their exploration ships in deep space. The ship was called the Horizon, and everyone believed it was gone forever. Now that same ship was coming home. The sensors showed a vessel moving through space in ways that made no sense. Normal ships followed straight paths from one point to another. The Horizon seemed to jump from place to place without traveling the distance between them. One moment it appeared near Jupiter, the next it was closer to Mars. The ship moved like it existed in several places at once. Admiral Lisa Chang arrived on the bridge with worry written across her face. She had commanded space fleets for 30 years and had never seen anything like this. The woman was known for staying calm in any crisis, but today her hands shook slightly as she studied the readings. "Run those identification codes again," Chang ordered the communications officer. Lieutenant Ben Parker worked at his station with quick fingers. The codes came back the same every time. This was definitely the Horizon, the exploration ship that had vanished during humanity's early attempts to explore distant stars. The ship had carried 200 brave souls into the unknown, and none of them had ever come back. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine as he watched the ship's strange movements. The Horizon didn't respond to their radio calls or follow normal space traffic rules. It just kept appearing and disappearing in different locations, getting closer to Earth with each jump. Whatever technology was moving that ship was beyond anything humans had ever built. Dr. Amy Foster rushed onto the bridge carrying a data pad filled with sensor readings. As the fleet's chief scientist, she had been studying the approaching vessel since it first appeared on their long-range scanners. Her face was pale, and her usually steady voice trembled as she spoke. "The ship's mass readings keep changing," Foster reported. "Sometimes our sensors say it weighs as much as a normal starship. Other times it barely registers at all. The energy patterns coming from that vessel are completely unknown. It's like the ship exists in multiple dimensions at the same time." Chang studied the data with growing concern. In all her years of space service, she had learned to trust her instincts. Right now, those instincts were screaming that something was very wrong. The Horizon looked like a human ship from the outside, but it moved like nothing humans had ever created. The mystery deepened when their detailed scans revealed changes to the ship's hull. Strange, geometric patterns covered the outer surface, designs that seemed to shift and change when observed directly. The patterns hurt to look at for too long, as if they existed in ways that human eyes weren't meant to perceive. Morrison ordered his crew to maintain a safe distance as the Horizon continued its approach. Whatever had happened to that ship during its 3 centuries in space had transformed it into something that challenged everything they knew about physics and engineering. The captain had seen many strange things in his 20 years of space service, but nothing had prepared him for this. The ship's energy readings fluctuated wildly, making their instruments give contradictory information. Sometimes the Horizon appeared to be powered by conventional fusion reactors. Other times it seemed to draw energy from empty space itself. Dr. Foster's team ran diagnostic after diagnostic on their equipment, but the instruments were working perfectly. The problem wasn't with their sensors. As the Horizon drew closer, more details became visible. The ship's hull bore scorch marks and strange crystalline growths that definitely hadn't been there when it left Earth centuries ago. Whatever the crew had encountered in deep space had left permanent changes on both the ship and presumably its occupants. Lieutenant Parker suddenly looked up from his communication station with excitement and fear mixed on his young face. "Admiral, I'm receiving a transmission from the Horizon." Chang nodded grimly. "Put it through." The voice that came through the speakers was unmistakably human, but there was something different about it. The words carried harmonics and undertones that seemed to bypass normal hearing and speak directly to their minds. It was like listening to someone speak while standing inside a cathedral. "This is Commander Rick Sullivan of the exploration vessel Horizon," the voice said. "We request permission to dock with your flagship. We have returned from our long journey with knowledge that will change everything humanity believes about the universe." Morrison exchanged glances with Admiral Chang. The name Sullivan was in the Horizon's crew records, listed as the ship's second in command. If this really was the same person, He would now be over 300 years old. Yet the voice sounded like that of a man in his prime. "Commander Sullivan," Chang responded carefully, "please explain your current status. According to our records, your ship has been missing for 3 centuries. There was a pause before Sullivan's strange voice replied, "Time moves differently in the spaces between stars, Admiral. We have learned much during our journey. The universe is far more complex than humanity realizes, and we are not alone among the stars. We must speak with your leadership immediately." Dr. Foster was frantically taking readings of the transmission itself. The radio signal carried impossible amounts of information, far more than normal human vocal cords could produce. Somehow Sullivan's voice was transmitting not just words, but complex mathematical concepts and dimensional coordinates. The horizon finally came to rest near the Dominion, though rest was not quite the right word for its continued subtle shifting between dimensional states. Up close, the modifications to the ship were even more dramatic. The hull seemed to be partially transparent in some places, revealing internal structures that defied geometric logic. Morrison made the decision to allow a controlled docking, despite the obvious risks. As captain of humanity's flagship, he had a duty to investigate this mystery. Whatever had happened to the Horizon crew might represent either humanity's greatest opportunity or its greatest threat. The docking procedure itself proved to be another demonstration of the ship's impossible capabilities. Instead of the careful maneuvering that normal ships required, the Horizon simply materialized its docking collar in perfect alignment with the Dominion's port. The 2 ships connected with mechanical precision that seemed to violate several laws of physics. As the airlock system synchronized, Morrison prepared to meet whatever version of humanity would emerge from the mysterious vessel. 3 centuries. Ago, the Horizon had left Earth carrying normal humans on a mission of exploration. What was returning defied all their assumptions about what humans could become. Captain Morrison led the reception team toward the airlock where the Horizon crew waited. Admiral Chang walked beside him, her hand resting on her sidearm, more from habit than any real belief that weapons would help against whatever they were about to encounter. Dr. Foster carried her scanning equipment, hoping to gather data about the transformed humans who had returned from the void. Sergeant Kyle Davis commanded the security detail, 6 Marines who had been briefed about the situation, but still looked nervous. These were tough soldiers who had faced pirates in alien environments without fear. Yet something about this encounter had them all on edge. The very air seemed to hum with energy as they approached the docking port. The airlock cycled open with a soft hiss, and Commander Sullivan stepped through first. Morrison had studied the man's personnel file during the approach, so he knew what Sullivan had looked like 3 centuries ago. The person who emerged bore a resemblance to those old photos, but something fundamental had changed. Sullivan moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost liquid. His body appeared solid and normal, but there was a quality to his presence that made him difficult to focus on directly. When Morrison tried to look at him straight on, his eyes wanted to slide away as if Sullivan existed slightly outside normal space. The man's eyes held depths that suggested he had seen things beyond human understanding. Behind Sullivan came the rest of his senior staff. Engineer Carol Hughes stepped through the airlock with movements so precise they seemed to manipulate invisible forces in the air around her. Her hands gestured in small ways that caused the nearby wall panels to respond, as if she could interface with technology through will alone. Navigator Pete Johnson appeared next, and he seemed to phase slightly out of sync with reality. When he moved, Morrison could swear he saw brief after-images, as if Johnson existed in several moments simultaneously. The navigator's smile was warm and human, but his presence felt like standing near a barely contained thunderstorm. Dr. Foster's instruments were going crazy, displaying readings that made no scientific sense. The returned crew members registered as human on biological scanners, but their life signs showed patterns that shouldn't be possible. Their neural activity created interference patterns that suggested consciousness operating on multiple levels at once. "You're wondering what happened to us," Sullivan said, his voice carrying those same impossible harmonics they had heard over the radio. 300 years ago, we set out to explore the galaxy as normal humans. We discovered that normal was far more limited than we ever imagined. Admiral Chang stepped forward, her military training overriding her unease. Commander Sullivan, I need you to explain your current status. Are you and your crew still human? Sullivan's expression grew thoughtful, as if he were translating concepts that existed beyond normal language. We are more human than we ever were before, Admiral. We learned that consciousness isn't limited to the physical brain. The beings we encountered taught us to expand our awareness beyond the boundaries of individual minds. Morrison felt a chill at the mention of other beings. You made contact with alien life? We made contact with the architects, Navigator Johnson answered, his form flickering slightly as he spoke. They exist in the spaces between realities in dimensions that overlap with ours, but remain normally invisible. They taught us that consciousness is the fundamental force that shapes reality itself. Dr. Foster couldn't contain her scientific curiosity any longer. How is any of this possible? Our understanding of physics says consciousness is produced by brain activity, not the other way around. Engineer Hughes approached Foster with that liquid grace, stopping just close enough to demonstrate her point. Without touching anything, Hughes somehow accessed the scanning equipment Foster carried. The devices began displaying information that downloaded directly into Foster's mind rather than appearing on screens. The data that flowed into Foster's consciousness was overwhelming. She suddenly understood technical concepts that had been theoretical possibilities just moments before. Energy could be drawn from quantum fluctuations in empty space. Matter could be manipulated by influencing the information structures that defined physical reality. Consciousness could exist in multiple locations simultaneously. Your instruments work by measuring physical phenomena, Hughes explained gently. We learned to work with the consciousness patterns that create those phenomena. In the first place, when you understand that matter and energy are expressions of information, technology becomes a matter of conscious intention rather than mechanical manipulation. Sergeant Davis and his Marines exchanged nervous glances. They were trained to handle threats they could see and understand. But this was beyond anything in their experience. The returned crew members weren't acting hostile, but their mere presence suggested capabilities that made conventional weapons seem primitive. Sullivan noticed their discomfort and smiled with genuine warmth. We're still the same people who left Earth 3 centuries ago, Sergeant. Carol still loves to solve engineering puzzles. Pete still gets excited about discovering new star systems. We haven't lost our humanity. We've simply learned to access more of what human consciousness is capable of. To demonstrate their continued humanity, the Horizon crew began sharing stories of their long journey. They spoke of homesickness during the early years of exploration, of friendship and loss when crew members died in the depths of space, of wonder at discovering life in forms they never could have imagined. But as they talked, it became clear that their experiences had fundamentally changed them. They described encountering the architects not as a single event, but as a gradual awakening that took place over decades. The alien beings didn't communicate through language or technology, but through direct consciousness contact that slowly expanded human awareness. The architects exist as pure consciousness, Sullivan explained. They've transcended physical form entirely, but they remember what it was like to be limited to single bodies. They saw potential in humanity that we didn't even know we possessed. Navigator. Johnson added, human consciousness has a unique property that most galactic species lack. We can maintain individual identity while simultaneously expanding into collective awareness. Most beings either stay trapped in individual minds or lose themselves completely in group consciousness. Humans can bridge both states. Morrison struggled to process the implications. Are you saying there are other intelligent species in the galaxy? Millions of them, Hughes answered matter-of-factly. The galaxy is teeming with consciousness in forms you can't imagine. Beings of living crystal that think in geological timescales, energy entities that paint with the colors of stars, hive minds that span entire solar systems. They're all connected through networks of consciousness that humanity has been unable to access. Admiral Chang felt the weight of command settling heavily on her shoulders. Why are you telling us this now? Sullivan's expression grew serious. Because humanity is about to make contact with galactic civilization whether you're ready or not. Your expansion into space has been noticed. Other species are debating what to do about a young race that shows both promise and potential danger. The implications hit Morrison like a physical blow. Humanity had always assumed they were alone in the universe, but apparently they had been, broadcasting their presence to a galaxy full of advanced civilizations. The question now was whether those civilizations saw humans as potential allies or threats to be contained. "How long do we have?" Chang asked. "Formal contact will occur within 18 months, Johnson answered. "The question is whether humanity will meet that contact as equals or as primitives requiring supervision." The tour of the horizon began in what had once been the ship's conventional engine room. Chief Engineer Ron Mitchell followed Carol Hughes through corridors that seemed to stretch farther than the ship's external dimensions could possibly contain. The walls themselves pulsed with soft light that responded to their presence, creating patterns that somehow conveyed meaning directly to his mind. When they reached the engine compartment, Mitchell stopped in complete amazement. Where he expected to find fusion reactors and antimatter containment systems, he instead discovered something that looked like a miniature galaxy suspended in a crystalline matrix. Points of light swirled in complex patterns, generating power by drawing energy from the quantum foam that existed in supposedly empty space. "This should be impossible," Mitchell whispered, running his hands over control surfaces that responded to his thoughts before he even touched them. These energy outputs would have vaporized any normal ship. Hughes approached him with that flowing grace that all the Horizon crew had developed. "Impossible within limited thinking," she said gently. "But when you understand that matter and energy exist across multiple reality layers, harnessing quantum forces becomes as natural as breathing." She gestured toward a crystalline structure at the center of the power matrix. "This consciousness interface allows us to exist in harmony with the fundamental forces of reality. Instead of fighting against universal laws, we work with them. The ship doesn't burn fuel anymore. It draws power from the zero-point field that exists everywhere." "Doctor." Foster was taking readings with instruments that suddenly seemed primitive compared to what she was witnessing. Her scanners showed energy patterns that violated everything she knew about physics. The Horizon was somehow tapping into the quantum energy that existed in empty space itself, providing unlimited clean power with no waste or side effects. Morrison studied the swirling lights in the power matrix, trying to understand how consciousness could interface with quantum forces. "How do you control something like this?" Navigator Johnson appeared beside them, his form slightly transparent as he demonstrated his point. "Control is the wrong concept, Captain. We learn to participate in reality rather than trying to dominate it. Consciousness and quantum forces are part of the same underlying structure of existence." To show what he meant, Johnson approached a section of the ship's hull that had been damaged during their long journey. Without tools or visible effort, he simply focused his attention on the damaged area. Morrison could somehow perceive Johnson's consciousness interfacing with the quantum information that defined the ship's structure. The damaged section began to repair itself, metal flowing like liquid to restore its original configuration. Within moments, the hull was perfect again, showing no signs that it had ever been damaged. Johnson had somehow convinced the ship's molecular structure to remember its ideal form and return to that state. "Your technology is based on manipulating matter," Johnson explained. "We learned to manipulate the information patterns that create matter in the first place. When you understand that consciousness is the fundamental force from which physical laws emerge, engineering becomes a matter of conscious intention." They moved deeper into the ship, discovering room after room of impossible technology. The navigation chamber contained star charts that showed space not as empty void between objects, but as a living network of consciousness connections spanning the galaxy. The medical bay used healing techniques that worked by harmonizing damaged tissue with quantum health patterns. In the ship's laboratory, they met Dr. Helen Gray, who had been the Horizon's physicist before their transformation. When she spoke, her words carried information that bypassed normal hearing and downloaded directly into their understanding. She had become a living interface between human consciousness and universal knowledge. Your Empire's technology manipulates matter through mechanical force, Dr. Gray explained, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in dimensions beyond normal sound. We learned to work with the consciousness structures that define reality itself. Physical laws aren't constraints to overcome, but patterns to understand and participate in. Mitchell watched in fascination as Gray demonstrated consciousness-based engineering. She approached a complex piece of machinery that had been brought from the Dominion for analysis. The device was broken beyond normal repair, its internal components fused by an energy overload. Gray placed her hands on the damaged equipment and closed her eyes. Mitchell could somehow sense her consciousness expanding outward, interfacing with the quantum patterns that defined the machine's structure. She wasn't forcing the device to repair itself, but rather helping it remember its original design and return to that configuration. Within minutes, the equipment reformed itself into perfect working condition. Every circuit had been restored, every component returned to its ideal state. Gray had essentially convinced the machine to heal itself by working with its underlying information structure rather than its physical components. The architects taught us that consciousness exists on multiple levels, Gray continued. Individual awareness is just the surface layer. Beneath that are deeper patterns that connect all minds, and below that are the fundamental consciousness structures that create physical reality itself. Dr. Foster struggled to document technologies that operated beyond conventional physics. How long did it take you to learn these techniques? Engineer Hughes smiled with that dimensional quality that all the returned crew possessed. Learning implies acquiring something new. This was more like remembering abilities that human consciousness already possessed. Your species simply forgot how to access deeper awareness during your focus on external technology development. They visited the ship's communication center, where the crew demonstrated consciousness-based contact with other civilizations across the galaxy. Instead of radio waves or subspace transmissions, they used direct consciousness networking that allowed instant communication across any distance. Johnson activated the communication system, and suddenly the room filled with presence from minds that existed light years away. Morrison found himself briefly in contact with consciousness patterns so alien that his mind struggled to process them. Crystalline beings that thought in geological timescales, energy entities that existed as living light, collective minds that spanned entire star systems. This is how galactic civilization really operates, Johnson explained as the contacts faded. Physical transportation and communication are primitive methods used by species that haven't developed consciousness networking. Most advanced civilizations abandoned mechanical technology millions of years ago. Hughes led them to observation ports that showed space in ways human eyes had never perceived before. Through consciousness-enhanced vision, they could see the energy patterns that connected all living things, the quantum pathways that allowed instant travel across vast distances, and the consciousness networks that linked every sentient being in the galaxy. Your empire covers 43 star systems, Hughes said, but you're isolated islands in an ocean of consciousness. There are over 2 million active civilizations in this galaxy alone, most of them connected through quantum awareness networks that humanity has been unable to access. Morrison felt overwhelmed by the scope of what they were revealing. Why haven't any of these civilizations contacted us before now? They have been, Gray answered, constantly. But consciousness-based communication requires receivers capable of quantum awareness. Humanity has been broadcasting into a galaxy full of minds, but you've been unable to hear the responses because your consciousness operates only on individual levels. The tour concluded in the ship's central chamber, a space that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Here, the Horizon crew demonstrated their most impressive capability, the ability to exist in several locations at once while maintaining individual identity and human emotional depth. This is what the architects saw in humanity, Sullivan said as he appeared in the chamber, despite having been in the engine room moments before. Your species can expand consciousness without losing individual creativity. Most galactic races either remain trapped in single minds or dissolve completely into collective awareness. Humans can bridge both states while maintaining the emotional complexity that makes you unique. Mitchell realized he was witnessing humanity's potential future, a transformation that would allow his species to participate as equals in a galactic community they never knew existed. In the central chamber of the Horizon, Commander Sullivan gathered the visiting team for a demonstration that would reshape their understanding of humanity's role in the galaxy. The chamber itself defied geometry, its walls curving in ways that suggested the space existed in more dimensions than normal human perception could process. "The architects didn't choose our species randomly," Sullivan began, his words carrying that multidimensional quality that had become familiar. "Human consciousness has properties that most galactic civilizations lack. You can maintain individual identity while expanding into collective awareness, making your species natural translators between different forms of consciousness." Admiral Chang studied the chamber walls, which had become transparent to reveal swirling patterns of energy that surrounded them. She could somehow sense that these patterns represented the consciousness networks that connected civilizations across the galaxy. The sight was both beautiful and overwhelming. Most species face a fundamental choice during consciousness evolution, Navigator Johnson explained, his form flickering as he demonstrated. They either remain trapped in individual minds or lose themselves completely in collective awareness. Humans can bridge both states, maintaining personal creativity while participating in group consciousness. Dr. Foster watched her instruments detect consciousness patterns flowing between the Horizon crew members. They were somehow sharing thoughts and experiences while remaining distinctly individual. Each person maintained their unique personality, but they could also access the knowledge and perspectives of their colleagues instantly. "How is this possible?" Foster asked, her scientific training struggling with concepts that challenged everything she knew about consciousness and identity. Engineer Hughes approached a section of the chamber where alien technology materialized from seemingly empty air. The device was clearly not of human origin, its crystalline structure pulsing with colors that conveyed meaning more directly than any human language ever could. "This was created by the Zephyrians," Hughes explained, placing her hands on the alien device. "They communicate entirely through emotional color frequencies. Traditional translation would require years of study to understand their language structure. Consciousness translation allows direct sharing of meaning and intent." The chamber suddenly filled with cascading colors that spoke directly to their minds. Morrison found himself understanding not just what the device did, but the emotional context of its creation, the cultural values of its makers, and the technological philosophy that guided Zephyrian civilization. The experience was more complete than any conversation he had ever had with another human. "This is why the architects invested 3 centuries in training us," Sullivan said, as the color display faded. "Humanity has the potential to become the galaxy's consciousness translators. Your species can help different forms of awareness understand each other in ways that have never been possible before." Johnson activated another demonstration, this time showing contact with a civilization of energy beings called the Luminari. These creatures existed as pure light and thought in patterns that spanned centuries. Through consciousness translation, the visiting humans briefly experienced the patient, ancient wisdom of beings who had watched stars be born and die. The experience was followed by contact with the collective of Kepler Prime, a hive mind that spanned an entire star system. Individual identity was meaningless to these beings, who thought as a unified consciousness of trillions. Yet through human consciousness translation, Morrison could understand their perspective while maintaining his own individual awareness. Each galactic civilization has developed unique forms of consciousness over millions of years of evolution, Sullivan explained. They've created amazing societies and technologies, but they can't understand each other. Crystalline beings can't comprehend energy entities. Hive minds can't relate to individual consciousness. That's where humanity becomes essential. Dr. Foster felt her worldview expanding beyond anything she had thought possible. "You're saying we could serve as universal translators for an entire galaxy of alien civilizations?" "Not just translators," Hughes corrected. "Consciousness bridges." Human emotional complexity creates quantum entanglement patterns that allow you to truly understand alien perspectives while maintaining your own identity. You can experience what it's like to think as a hive mind without losing your individual creativity. The demonstration continued with examples of conflicts between galactic civilizations that had persisted for millions of years simply because the species involved couldn't understand each other's forms of consciousness. Wars had been fought over misunderstandings that seemed trivial once consciousness translation made real communication possible. Morrison watched displays showing ancient battles between species that were now working together thanks to consciousness mediation. Crystal beings and energy entities that had been enemies for eons now collaborated on projects spanning multiple star systems. Hive minds and individual consciousness species that had never been able to communicate now shared knowledge freely. The galaxy has been waiting for humanity to develop enough to serve this function, Johnson said. Your expansion into space was the signal that your species was ready to begin consciousness evolution. But first contact will happen whether you're prepared or not. Admiral Chang felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. What exactly does that mean for Earth? Sullivan gestured to the chamber walls, which displayed a map of local space showing the positions of various alien fleets. 12 different civilizations had ships positioned within a few light years of human space, all of them observing humanity's development with intense interest. Some view your species as potential allies who could help solve galactic communication problems, Sullivan explained. Others see humans as dangerous primitives who should be contained before you develop further. A few consider your people to be interesting specimens worthy of study. The map showed different colored regions representing the influence of various alien factions. Some areas glowed green, indicating civilizations that viewed humanity favorably. Other regions pulsed red, representing species that considered humans a potential threat. Yellow zones marked civilizations that remained undecided about humanity's future. The Velthron Empire believes that young species should be placed under protective supervision until they develop sufficient maturity, Johnson said, highlighting a large red zone. They're not evil, just extremely cautious. They would limit human expansion to your current star systems until you prove you can participate safely in galactic society. Hughes indicated a green zone that represented the Crystal Confederacy. These beings see humanity's potential as consciousness translators and want to help you develop those abilities, but they're currently outnumbered by more cautious civilizations. Dr. Foster studied the map with growing understanding. So the next few years will determine whether we become galactic partners or protected primitives? Exactly, Sullivan confirmed. First formal contact will occur within 18 months. By then, the galactic community will have decided how to classify humanity. The choice isn't whether contact will happen, but what role humans will play when it does. Morrison felt the magnitude of the situation settling over him like a heavy weight. What can we do to influence that decision? Prove that humanity can evolve beyond current limitations, Hughes answered. Show that your species can develop consciousness translation abilities without losing the emotional depth and individual creativity that makes you unique. Demonstrate that humans can be trusted with galactic-level responsibilities. The chamber, walls shifted to show potential futures for humanity. In one scenario, Earth remained under benevolent but firm alien supervision, free to develop within current territories but prevented from expanding further until consciousness maturity was achieved. In another, humans served as honored mediators in a galactic community, helping ancient civilizations understand each other for the first time in millions of years. The process has already begun, Sullivan said. Every human who learns consciousness, expansion techniques influences the collective probability. The question is whether enough people can develop these abilities before formal contact occurs. Johnson added, We've returned not just to share what we learned, but to begin training others. Starting with volunteers from your military and scientific communities, we can create a core group of consciousness translators who can then teach others. Admiral Chang made the crucial decision. What do you need from us? Permission to begin teaching, Sullivan answered. Within 6 months, we can train enough consciousness translators to start preparing your entire species for what's coming. But the choice must be voluntary. Consciousness evolution can't be forced. Morrison realized they were being offered humanity's greatest opportunity for transcendence, but also its greatest test. The galaxy was watching, and the next 18 months would determine whether his species joined the cosmic community as equals or remained supervised children playing in a small corner of space. The journey back to Earth aboard the Dominion was unlike anything Captain Morrison had experienced in 20 years of space service. Word of the Horizon's return had spread through secure military channels, and every major world in the Terran Empire was demanding immediate access to the impossible technologies they had witnessed. Admiral Chung spent most of the voyage in heated discussions with Earth Command, trying to explain discoveries that challenged every assumption about humanity's place in the universe. How do you tell an empire that considers itself the peak of human achievement that they're essentially cosmic children playing with primitive toys? Dr. Foster had retreated to her laboratory, attempting to document technologies that operated beyond conventional physics. Her reports read like fantasy novels, filled with references to consciousness-based engineering and quantum intention matrices that her colleagues would inevitably dismiss as impossible. Yet she had witnessed these technologies working with her own eyes. Chief Engineer Mitchell wandered the ship's corridors in a daze, his mind struggling to process engineering concepts that violated everything he had learned. He found himself sketching designs for consciousness-powered engines and quantum manipulation tools, even though he didn't understand how they could possibly function. But it was the Horizon crew's final demonstration that truly drove home the magnitude of the choice facing humanity. 3 days before reaching Earth, Commander Sullivan requested permission to show them what he called the human potential. Sullivan led the senior staff to the Dominion's main assembly hall, where he had somehow modified the ship's holographic systems to display something that shouldn't exist. The technology required to create such detailed projections was beyond anything in the Terran Empire's capabilities, yet Sullivan had accomplished it in a matter of hours. "What you're about to see," Sullivan explained, "is humanity's future if you choose evolution over stagnation." The hologram that materialized showed Earth, but not as they knew it. This version of their homeworld pulsed with networks of consciousness-based energy that connected every human mind in a web of shared awareness. Cities had been transformed into living organisms that responded to their inhabitants' needs and desires. Space around the planet shimmered with vessels that moved through dimensional folds rather than conventional propulsion. Humans worked alongside alien beings in perfect harmony, their consciousness translation abilities allowing seamless communication between species that had been isolated for millions of years. This is Earth 40 years from now, if humanity embraces consciousness evolution, Sullivan said. Your species becomes the galaxy's mediators, helping different forms of awareness understand each other while maintaining your unique human perspective. Morrison watched humans in the projection serving as living bridges between alien civilizations, facilitating communications between crystal beings and energy entities, helping hive minds understand individual consciousness, and translating emotional concepts between species that experienced reality in completely different ways. The projection showed human consciousness translators working throughout the galaxy, bringing peace to conflicts that had raged for eons simply because the combatants couldn't understand each other. Ancient grievances dissolved when consciousness translation revealed that apparent enemies were actually allies who had been misinterpreting each other's intentions. But then Sullivan showed them the alternative future, and Morrison felt his heart sink. The second hologram displayed a very different Earth, one where humanity had rejected consciousness evolution and attempted to face galactic contact with conventional technology alone. The planet existed under benevolent but firm supervision by advanced alien civilizations who viewed humans as promising but dangerously immature. This future isn't malicious, Sullivan explained. The galactic civilizations wouldn't destroy humanity. They're not evil conquerors seeking to enslave your species. But they would limit your expansion until you developed sufficient consciousness maturity to participate safely in galactic society. In this timeline, Earth had become a protected world, free to develop within current star systems but prevented from expanding further. Humans lived comfortable lives under alien guidance, but they remained essentially children in a universe of adults, never achieving their potential as consciousness translators. Admiral Chang studied both projections with the weight of command heavy on her shoulders. How do we ensure the first future instead of the second? Navigator Johnson appeared beside the holographic controls, adding another layer to the display. The choice is already being made. Every human who learns consciousness expansion techniques influences the collective probability. The process has begun, but success isn't guaranteed. Engineer Hughes gestured toward readings that showed consciousness evolution spreading slowly through human populations. The techniques we learned from the architects can be taught to others. Students can then teach more students, creating an exponential growth in consciousness-capable humans. Dr. Foster finally found her voice, her scientific training wrestling with implications that seemed impossible. How do we even begin implementing something like this? You're talking about fundamentally changing what it means to be human. We're talking about becoming more human than you've ever been, Sullivan corrected gently. Individual creativity and emotional depth aren't obstacles to consciousness evolution. They're the very qualities that make humans unique in the galaxy and essential as consciousness translators. He gestured to the positive future hologram, zooming in on individual humans who had mastered consciousness expansion. They maintained their distinct personalities, their unique quirks and creative abilities, while simultaneously participating in networks of shared awareness that spanned star systems. Morrison could see that consciousness evolution didn't erase human individuality but enhanced it. People became more themselves, not less, when they learned to access deeper levels of awareness. Their creativity expanded, their emotional depth increased, and their ability to connect with others grew beyond anything currently possible. The process begins with understanding that consciousness isn't produced by the brain, Sullivan explained. Consciousness is accessed through the brain. Once humans learn to expand their consciousness access, the technologies we've shown you become as natural as breathing. Dr. Foster leaned forward, her curiosity overcoming her fear. What would be required to begin training others? Hughes smiled with that dimensional quality that had become familiar. Volunteers. Starting with your military and scientific communities, we can begin teaching consciousness expansion techniques. Within 6 months, we can train enough instructors to begin preparing your entire species. Admiral Chang asked the crucial question that had been weighing on all their minds. What guarantee do we have that this will work, that humanity won't lose itself in the process? Johnson's expression grew serious. No guarantees exist, Admiral. Consciousness evolution is a choice that each individual must make freely. It can't be forced or mandated. But consider the alternative. In 18 months, formal contact will occur whether humanity is ready or not. Sullivan added, the galaxy has been waiting for a species like humanity for millions of years. Your consciousness patterns are unique, possibly unprecedented. Even the architects are curious to see what humans might become when you fully develop your potential. The holographic display shifted one final time, showing the current positions of alien fleets observing human space. 12 different civilizations watched and waited, their final judgment about humanity's future still undecided. The next 18 months would tip the balance toward partnership or protection. Morrison realized he was witnessing the most important moment in human history. The choice wasn't just about advanced technology or galactic citizenship. It was about what humans could become when they transcended the limitations of individual consciousness while maintaining the emotional depth and creativity that made them uniquely human. As the Dominion approached Earth's solar system, Morrison knew he carried more than just a report of first contact with a lost ship. He was delivering humanity's invitation to join a cosmic community that had been waiting centuries for their species to mature enough to participate. The horizon had returned not just with impossible technologies, but with humanity's chance to become something unprecedented in galactic history. The question now was whether enough humans would have the courage to evolve beyond their current limitations and embrace their true potential as the galaxy's consciousness translators. In 18 months, the universe would formally acknowledge humanity's existence. What humans chose to become between now and then would determine their species' role in the cosmic community for thousands of years to come.